This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick.
From Microbe TV, this is TWiV. This Week in Virology, episode 1218, recorded on May 14th, 2025. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me here at the incubator in New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Vincent. Good to see you in person.
It's been a while.
Actually, yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, you should come more often.
Now that I remember how comfortable these chairs are.
Great.
Yeah, these
are great chairs. Incubator is a great space for disseminating science, right?
Yes.
Now I can see your tie, and there's no excuse for me not that it looks like chains.
Well, it's it's an artist's rendition of anthrax.
So the chains are...
Well, it's gram variable. Yeah.
The big things in the background are just the artist's thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. Anthrax, eh?
Yeah.
Nice. So is this a tie that you had left here?
So, no, this is what I wore to, I was Columbia this morning, and so I wore this rounding up at Milstein.
Okay.
But let's get into it. I'm going to start with my quotation. Change happens by listening and then starting a dialogue with the people who are doing something you don't believe is right.
This is perfect because, as you know, the administration is doing things we don't think is right, but we can't have a dialogue with them.
I guess that's the challenge. So this was Jane Goodall, right? And she was quite an activist, quite an advocate for change. But I think that, so sometimes, right, we were saying right before we started that people, oh my gosh, we know we don't have to hear you complain. But I think some of our listeners appreciate the fact that we keep repeatedly saying we're not okay with what's going on.
I think we have to every episode because you don't know who's listening, when they're listening. So the more you say it, the better. And I'm sorry if some people know everything we're saying, but that's the way it's going to be. We have to keep complaining, and you'll get the message and pass it on.
Well, hopefully that's what's going to happen. And we'll give you content. So when someone says something that you don't believe in, listen, and do listen. Don't just start talking. Listen, try to understand where it's coming from, and then and then have that dialogue because, it's interesting. It's this thing like once you hear things over and over again, you start to believe they're true, even though they're not.
Correct.
So you've got to over and over just keep repeating the truth till people start to realize. So I will start with my attack on science section. I'll put on my glasses here. So let's update here. The Trump administration has terminated a federal advisory group that issues recommendations to U.S. health agencies to help prevent the spread of infectious diseases in healthcare facilities. So the Healthcare Infection Control Practices Advisory Committee consists of 14 voting non-federal employee members who are selected by the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary. We all know who that is. They have expertise in infectious diseases, infection prevention and control, healthcare epidemiology, nursing, public health, and other areas of health and medicine. The group meets up to 8 times a year at the CDC headquarters in Atlanta. This was established back in 1991, so we've been doing this for 30 plus years. And they're responsible for crafting and reviewing guidance on a host of infection control and prevention protocols across U.S. healthcare facilities, really to protect the patients and the healthcare workers from getting infectious diseases. And they've issued evidence-based recommendations to the CDC on standard precautions for patient care, hand hygiene, use of personal protective equipment, isolation of sick patients, environmental infection control, disease-specific care, and preferred methods of cleaning and disinfecting medical devices.
So what do you think about this, Daniel?
It's horrible, right? I mean, if you go into a hospital, you would like to know that that facility is getting some evidence-based guidance on how to keep you safe, how to keep the people that take care of you safe. So as a patient, I want to know that we're getting good evidence-based guidance. As a person working in these facilities, I want to know that my coworkers and I are safe in these facilities.
So who could possibly think this is a good idea in the administration?
I think it's more just cutting jobs. Like we, if we're going to give the billionaires all these tax cuts, we got to stop spending money on things. And this is something that's getting cut.
I also heard that this bombing in the Middle East is costing $1 billion a week. Maybe that's where some of the money's going.
All right.
It's not science, I know, but it's totally crazy to take away a program that's beneficial. The same thing with the food outbreak, the E. coli food outbreak. They wouldn't publicize it, but that's just absurd.
We want to know this stuff.
You do, so you can avoid it, right?
Yeah. I love headlines. Now is not the time to eat bagged lettuce. I'm not sure when the time to eat bagged lettuce is, but you want to know.
You always have to wash it, even if it says pre-wash. I don't believe it.
Yeah. Now you need to. Little bit on Mpox here. Mpox, Sierra Leone battles Mpox surge. Actually, we've got a patient up at Milstein, the academic center, with a really bad case of Mpox. But here, Sierra Leone reported its first Mpox cases in January, and activity is now skyrocketing, averaging about 100 new cases a day. This outbreak is driven by the clade 2B. The global strain of the virus. 68% of the patients are male, 32% female. I just want to point that out. A third are females, right? We had this problem here in the U.S. where we just never tested females. And if you don't test, you don't get a positive test. Most of these folks, 30 to 35 years of age. And only 7% of the illnesses are in people with HIV. 93% of these folks are HIV negative, and a third are ladies.
How do you treat these individuals here in the U.S.?
So this is tough, right? Because we just had that New England Journal of Medicine publication where they studied tecovirimat, which works great in animals. No evidence that it does much in human beings.
Against Mpox.
Against Mpox.
It's probably okay against smallpox. Who knows?
Who knows, right? Yeah. So, that still is kind of the standard of care. But
do you give them tecovirimat?
Yeah. And we have the big STOMP trial that was Jason Zucker was involved with. But yeah, I'm not sure how much. But the big thing is wound care, things like that.
Yeah.
All right, bird flu. I got a cool picture of a
cat eating a bird.
Yes, don't do that. Come back and get you. But more on bird flu in cats. We haven't been hearing much about bird flu. I was worried about that. But the article, Avian Influenza Virus Infections in Felines, a systematic review of 2 decades of literature, published in Open Forum Infectious Disease. So here the authors point out that domestic cats are susceptible to avian influenza virus infection, AIV infection, and provide a potential pathway for zoonotic spillover to humans, right? So that's when it goes from the animals into humans. They provide a systematic review of the scientific literature to describe the epidemiology and global distribution of avian influenza viral infections in cats for really 20 years, 2004 to 2024. They identified over 600 avian influenza infections in cats, including over 300 deaths, 18 countries, 12 different felid species. So not just domestic cats, but like leopards, cheetahs, etc. They report a drastic flux in the number of avian influenza viral infections among domestic cats in 2003, 2004, commensurate with the emergence of the H5N1 clade 2344B. They estimate that this phenomenon is underreported, and really suggests we should be doing some more surveillance of domestic cats. And I have these figures here, Vincent, and you can see sort of over time the number of peer-reviewed publications, right? So the publications are starting to go up, but they also have this figure where you can see the number of cases, the number of different felines that have been infected. But it's interesting. You don't see much activity, and then you see it really shoot up in the last couple of years. But there was this big outbreak back, about 20 years ago, and that was when there were 147 avian influenza virus-associated tiger deaths at a tiger zoo in Thailand.
600 deaths or 600 infections in cats is not a lot, considering there are billions of cats in the U.S., or millions, tens of millions. So either they're not encountering it or they're not very susceptible.
Or we're not testing.
We're not
I
testing
think,
also.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because you think about, if you have a sick cat and you take your cat to the vet, is the vet going to do an avian influenza test on your cat? Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what they're arguing is that, we're seeing more, but are we looking better? Or is there a lot going on that we're not aware of? And we're around these cats, right? And cats cough, right? Because we've had like transmission of plague from cats to humans. So, should we be doing more surveillance, sort of the canary in the coal mine? Let's find out what's going on in the cats. All right, measles. So United States, we broke the magic 1,000 as of May 8th, over 1,000 confirmed measles cases, 31 jurisdictions. It's all over the place, and the numbers keep going up. The last update for Texas, we've got 717 cases. This is another 8 cases since the last update, and the first couple cases in Dallas. So moving into Dallas. North Dakota, measles outbreak in North Dakota prompts local health officials to quarantine unvaccinated school children. So North Dakota reported 9 measles cases. Recent outbreak among school children in Williams County. It's in the northwest part of the state. And there's a law there which they're enforcing that requires unvaccinated students to quarantine for 21 days after exposure to someone who has the virus. So families of 188 unvaccinated students in the school district received a letter informing them that their children would need to quarantine for 3 weeks.
Why are they unvaccinated?
Exactly. It's a problem.
So this whole outbreak spreading throughout the U.S. could be prevented if we went in and vaccinated these communities forcefully, but not forcefully, but made a big effort, and that's not being done.
I mean, and I think the challenge, right, is it's like, you go to these places where I go where people are just, desperate to get vaccines, like Panama, different parts of Africa, and here we have access to vaccines. But unfortunately, there are people that realize they can make money by misinforming people.
Yes.
Also, I mean, I got to say, let's be honest, there is a mistrust of government, right? And so some of these people, if the one recommending vaccines is a government official, Department of Health worker, that's different than if a trusted person comes in and talks to them. And that was one of the great assets we had down in Panama. Buddy Ben Labrat, known, trusted, and so if we had better communication, better education, which we're trying to do, let people know the truth. We're not trying to sell you snake oil and Joe Mercola vitamin packs, right? Because no, there are people out there who want to make money off lawsuits. You get some ambulance chasers, trying to, come up with ways that they can get money in their pocket. You got these unscrupulous snake oil salesmen. So
it's just incredible that someone would risk people's lives to make money. I could see other areas, right? Financial scams and so forth, but someone's life?
They're willing to do it. It's blood money, right? Canada, sorry you guys up north, but you're not doing well when it comes to measles. You got even more measles than us. So this data is a little bit like, so this is in week 17, right? So this is end of April 20 to 26. So we're a few weeks ahead of here. Already by then, 1,299 confirmed, 207 probable cases. So lots of measles up there in Canada. And Mexico, our neighbor to the south. We read that down in Mexico, vaccine teams in Mexico scramble over measles outbreak rippling out from Mennonite community. So in Mexico, cases have been concentrated. They also have a Mennonite community, long skeptical of vaccines and distrustful of authorities. I hear you on that. I'm not a big, when it comes to authority figures, but in the northern border state of Chihuahua, and officials say results of their campaign alongside Mennonite leaders have been mixed. And it is challenged because there's all this misinformation entrenched there. But they do cite tens of thousands of new vaccinations in Chihuahua, but infections have ballooned and spread past the community to indigenous and other populations. They've documented 922 cases and 1 death already in Chihuahua. Officials. how do you pronounce that? Chihuahua, like the dog, I guess?
Chihuahua, yeah.
Chihuahua, like the dog. Officials, health workers, and local leaders say the numbers are likely underestimated, and misinformation about vaccines and endemic distrust of authorities are their biggest obstacles.
So this distrust of authorities, the CDC is an authority, right? But they don't tell you what to do. They make recommendations, and the health departments of each state then decides what to do. So it seems to me that you shouldn't distrust that, right?
I guess that's the challenge, right? Is so, the CDC has been mischaracterized. The CDC didn't force anyone to do anything. The CDC has been an educational organization. They're who you call up when you're like, hey, I need to know the answers. Can you give me some guidance? They meet, here's the science, this is what we know. So the CDC provides guidance. And then you're right, it's each local department of health, that's where you come up with the rules. And it's your local department of health. Like, these are people who are selected, you vote, people then get selected. And so
that should be your trusted local people, right?
It should be your trusted local people.
It's not working.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is mischaracterization of who these people are and what they do. Yeah. So I'm going to trust an ambulance chaser who's going to make money off misinformation.
Well,
come on.
It never makes sense, does it?
Yeah, never makes sense. All right, flu. Things are looking pretty good with flu. We're coming out of a pretty bad season, but the wastewater levels are low. If you look about activity across the country, it's all looking pretty green, getting down into pretty low levels. ER department visits are down. But a couple bits of bad news here. I'm going to sort of, I had dinner the other Friday night at one of the sailing clubs. It was kind of the end of the frostbiting season, the end of the crazy people who race sailboats in the winter, and all us crazy folks are hanging out. And if you're hanging out with me, of course, what am I talking about but infectious disease? So I'm sitting with one of the former commodores of this club, Sue Miller, and we got to talking about influenza and particularly pediatric deaths. And I always like the fact that we always put in the sources of the information. We just say stuff. We always cite. Sometimes I do this in like personal emails. Like I cite them. We're coming to the end of what was a bad season, and I'm going to read this here. This is from the AP News. The season has not only been hard on children. CDC officials have described it as highly severe and estimate that so far there have been at least 47 million illnesses, 610,000 hospitalization, 26,000 deaths this season. This is so far. We haven't gotten the final tallies, which we'll get in the autumn. But why are they referring to pediatric deaths? So we had another 10 pediatric deaths this last week. That gets us up to 226 deaths. This is data from the CDC. And New York State reported 25 pediatric flu deaths so far this season. And I'll leave in a link to this. But this is the highest number the state has ever seen in a single season. So 226 deaths across the country, another 10 deaths just this last week, and 25 children died of the flu this winter. And we've talked about this repeatedly. 90% of flu deaths are in unvaccinated, and about half of these kids were completely normal. That's historically what we see, completely normal, and then within 48 hours, they die from the flu.
But unvaccinated, right?
Unvaccinated, yeah. Well, can we prevent this? So what about preventing some of these deaths with Zofluza, or as we in the trade call it, Remdesivir? So we have this article here. I'm going to highlight in bold. A phase 3 safety and efficacy study of Remdesivir marboxil in children less than 1 year old with suspected or confirmed influenza, published in the Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal. So phase 3 global multi-center single-arm study, so efficacy study, to look at these kids less than 1 year of age who it's a single dose of Remdesivir. The primary endpoint was safety. Secondary endpoints include pharmacokinetics and efficacy, so time to alleviation of signs and symptoms, duration of fever and symptoms, antibiotic use, and cessation of viral shedding. 48 of 49 enrolled patients received Baloxavir, a single arm, no placebo here, of whom 15 had positive centralized influenza reverse, basically PCR. And they do this intent to treat. The median age was 6 months, right? 79.2% were not vaccinated, so about 80% not vaccinated. Overall, 51 adverse events were reported. Most were mild. They say grade 1 to 2. The most common things were loose stool, so diarrhea, vomiting. 2 patients experienced more severe adverse events, but not related to treatment, just sick young kids with the flu. In the intent to treat influenza, median time to alleviation of signs and symptoms was 163 hours. Median duration of fever was 23 hours, and median time to cessation of viral shedding was 24.5. Just sort of compared to what we're expecting, we're seeing some efficacy here and very safe.
So the shedding 24 hours is much shorter than normal.
Normal than you'd expect, because a lot of the data that we've seen is like 4 or 5 days. So, yeah, kind of nice to see this.
So some of these kids who got very severe flu could have been given this.
Yeah. So you could vaccinate and then you could treat. And those are the things we're falling down on, right? We talked about one of the things that led to so many deaths this year is most children in the United States did not get a flu shot this fall, where until recently, the majority of kids in the U.S. were getting flu shots. So, yeah, we're falling down on the job there. And the second is treatment, early antiviral. It's recommended guidance from the CDC. They're not forcing you, obviously, because a lot of people are not doing it. All right, RSV, another vaccine-preventable illness. And so levels are low. And we have an MMWR, interim evaluation of respiratory syncytial virus hospitalization rates among infants and young children after introduction of respiratory syncytial virus prevention products, United States, October 2024 to February 2025. So maternal RSV vaccine, and then nirsevimab, that's the long-acting monoclonal antibody for the infants, became widely available during this season. So we're really some real-time data. National Immunization Survey data indicated the proportion of U.S. infants age 0 to 7 protected by either maternal vaccination or nirsevimab increased up to 66%. So 30% in October, 66% February 2025. And here they're going to evaluate the association between availability of the products and infant and child RSV-associated hospitalization rates. The rates among children aged less than 5 were compared for the 2024-2025 to like the pre-COVID-19 season, 2018 through 2020 RSV seasons. They're using data from 2 different places, RSV-associated hospitalization surveillance network, so RSVNet, and the new vaccine surveillance network, NVSN. So if you look at the infants 0 to 7 months, 2024-2025, RSV-associated hospitalizations were lower compared to the pre-pandemic. Estimated relative reduction of 43% with RSVNet, 28% with NVSN. And the largest estimated rate reduction was observed among infants aged 0 to 2 months. We saw 52 and 45% looking at the 2 different surveillance systems. So really nice.
Yes, very good. I went to my doc today and he said to me, he was looking at the vaccines I need. And he said, "Oh, you don't need RSV. You're not 75. I said, "I already got it 2 years ago." So what is the age for RSV?
So the age, like without risk factors, is 75.
Okay.
And then it goes down below 75 for people 50 up to 75 if you have risk factors.
Well, the CVS didn't know anything about me. I just registered and they gave it to me.
Yep. Well, so you're in a sense, I'm going to say you're lucky because when it first came out, right, it was that shared decision making. So like everyone, I think it was above 65 shared decision making. So, you could say, here's what we know. And there was that safety signal out of South Africa.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so no RSV vaccines for the South Africans. Okay. Nice AP headline. U.S. infant mortality dropped in 2024. Experts partly credit RSV shots. So the nation's infant mortality rate dropped last year after 2 years of hovering at a late pandemic plateau. The infant mortality national rate dropped to about 5.5 infant deaths per 1,000. And this is down from 5.6 per 1,000. And some experts think one reason could be a vaccination campaign against RSV. So, COVID, we really seem to be moving in a good direction here. We've got our multicolored wastewater curve and all across the country, right? That little blip, but now it looks like we're down in the low across the country. So maybe it'll never come back up.
I think not. I think in the fall, but the question is whether in June it will, like it did last summer, right?
Yeah. Do we get a reprieve? Do we get a big summer peak? We'll keep track. And why do we keep track? Does this work? Does following the wastewater actually predict clinical cases? Well, we have the article, Wastewater Measures of SARS-CoV-2 Accurately Predict Frequency of Symptomatic Infections in the Community, published in JID. And basically, yes, they've got a really nice, where they look at the wastewater, they predict what's going to happen, and it follows that dynamic linear model with a p-value of 0.001. So really nice ability to predict. All right, and Vincent, this is great. It looks like we may have finally found that smoking gun and can say that SARS-CoV-2, the cause of COVID, came from, well, let's see, we may have figured it out. It may actually be a zoonosis. So the very easy to read article, the recency and geographical origins of the bat viruses ancestral to SARS-CoV-2 and SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2 was just published in the journal Cell. Just when I was starting to think that there were some brilliant scientists in China that were many years ahead of us here in the US with the ability to engineer a potent virus and release it from a lab despite the lack of any evidence to support such a theory. So there's a nice summary, but I'm going to recommend that for a deep dive, people listen to TWiV 1217. But it's a little summary here. So the emergence of SARS-CoV in 2002 and SARS-CoV-2 in 2019 led to increased sampling of sarbecoviruses circulating in horseshoe bats, employing phylogenetic inference while accounting for a recombination of bat sarbecoviruses. We find that the closest inferred bat virus ancestors of SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2 existed less than a decade prior to the emergence in humans. This analysis showed that bat sarbecovirus traveled at rates approximating their horseshoe bat hosts and circulated in Asia for millennia. But they then find that the direct ancestors of SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2 are unlikely to have reached their respective sites of emergence via dispersal in the bat reservoir alone, supporting the wildlife trade playing a role in zoonotic spillover.
And I just want to make a point to people who think this came from a lab. It didn't, because they didn't have it in the lab. They hadn't sampled this virus before.
Maybe they lied.
2019. Well, I mean, that's not science, though. You have to provide evidence that they lied. And so far, there's zero. And there's evidence like this that it originated in nature. Recently, Jeffrey Sachs, Columbia economist, right, published a paper concluding it came from Ralph Barrick's lab in North Carolina.
Really?
This is so stupid. The epicenter was Wuhan. That's where it originated. It doesn't come from North Carolina and make an epicenter in Wuhan. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So people don't know what they're talking about. Jeff Sachs is not a scientist, as you know. He's not a virologist. He has no idea what he's talking about.
But I think that's the challenge. So you see evidence like this where you can actually see the virus evolving over time. And the interesting thing here, it's like depending on how you do this viral evolution. Was it like 6 years ago? Was it 20 years ago? Because there's this recombination issue. And basically you're seeing it evolve towards what ultimately jumps into us. But then you see, how did it get to Wuhan? The bats are so far away. It sounds like what we suspected, and what we keep warning about is the wildlife trade is going to bring those bats to a wet market. where they're going to sell them, right?
Yeah.
And
And as a control sort of, they use SARS-CoV-1, right?
yeah,
Same thing. The bats that carry the ancestor are far away, just north of SARS-CoV-2 containing bats. And they had to move over 1,000 kilometers to Guangzhou
Yeah.
by the wildlife trade.
Yep.
So this is nothing that we're saying is brand new. It happened before, right?
and we have a lab there in this area that is interested and trying to understand. And, you know, it's crazy. We've been predicting this for years, that there are these viruses in the animals. It's just a matter of when they jump across. You got to stop with the wet markets, or they're going to jump across and get people sick. And then it happens. And, you know, those of us that have been warning are like, no, you did it. So
The blaming of a lab is purely 1,000% political.
I think that's the problem. It's political.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, people start conversations with, why can't they just admit it? The other is like, why can't they just admit that what we warned them about happened?
None of the people that, like Jeffrey Sachs, ever consider a lot of data like this data that say it came from nature. It's a zoonotic event.
Yeah.
They just ignore it.
I think sometimes we let them drive the conversation. We let them ask the question, you know, and they say, so the lab, it's right there. How do you deal with the geographical proximity? How do you explain that? And I think what we have to say is, how do you explain all this data? You could see it evolving towards this pathogen. How do you explain that?
What they also do effectively is, like Sachs published in some non-peer-reviewed publication, and we don't publish outside of peer review the zoonotic idea, right? Maybe we should be doing more of that.
I think we probably need to. Yeah.
You know, someone has to write an op-ed for the Times that said, well, not the Times because not enough people read it, but saying SARS-CoV-2 came from nature.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the data is very, very compelling. We could see this evolution. We looked at it several times, all the variability in the isolates in that market, even though, you know, quote unquote, it was Clorox, but we did get the evidence. You could see there were a couple different variants there, a couple different isolates there. I mean, it all makes sense scientifically that it was evolving in the bats down in this southwest, you know, region, then brought through the animal trade. We've been warning to a wet market. Then it gets into people and spreads from there.
Yep.
The science is very compelling. And I think, we need to start publishing and repeating over and over again, this is the story. And because people are like, we don't want to have this happen again. Well, if you don't understand how it happened this time, you're not going to prevent it again by stopping surveillance. You're not going to stop it again by stopping the science. And really what stopped this in its tracks was virology and vaccinology and Operation Warp Speed and this tremendous vaccine that saved millions and millions of lives. It didn't kill millions of people. It saved millions of lives.
So, Daniel, we shouldn't have just let it rip?
No. And we already lost over 1 million people in the United States alone, millions of people around the world, and that was with mitigation. You let it rip, and millions and millions and more people would have died. All right. We are going to go into pregnant individuals, vulnerable populations, the article COVID-19 infection history as a risk factor for early pregnancy loss. We haven't really talked enough about all the children we lost. Results from the electronic health record-based Southeast Texas COVID and pregnancy cohort study published in BMC Medicine. So here we've got 26,783 pregnancy episodes. They've heard of them. The risk of miscarriage among pregnancy episodes with a miscarriage, live birth, or delivery outcome was 6.3%. And here they're looking at a history of mild or moderate COVID, and this was associated with miscarriage, a 2.5-fold adjusted odds ratio. Same model, mild and moderate to severe COVID-19 in the first trimester associated with miscarriage, odds ratio 2.3. So in this study where they're looking at 27,000 pregnancies, women infected with COVID-19 before or during pregnancy are 2 to 3 times the risk for miscarriage before 20 weeks gestation. So, you know, let it rip, let it infect all these pregnant individuals, and you're losing all these babies.
And this is because pregnancy is immunosuppressive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Vaccination. The article Immunogenicity and Safety of Influenza and COVID-19 Multi-Component Vaccine in Adults 50 Years and Over. So it's a randomized clinical trial published in JAMA. The results are from a phase 3 study. mRNA 1083 elicited non-inferior immune responses against standard care immunization, licensed standard dose or high dose flu, co-administered with licensed SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. This multi-component vaccine, mRNA 1083, had an acceptable tolerability and safety profile. So this mRNA, it gets a little confusing with the numbers. So this mRNA 1083, it's got components of mRNA 1010, so Moderna's vaccine candidate for seasonal influenza, and mRNA 1283, this is Moderna's next generation COVID-19 vaccine targeting Omicron XBB. So because this is a hot topic, I can take a little extra time and go through the design in detail. So here, participants are in 2 age cohorts. So we've got folks 65 and over, and we've got folks 50 to 64, and then randomly assigned 1-to-1 to receive. Either they're going to get the mRNA 1083, right? That's our combo COVID flu mRNA shot, or they're going to get the mRNA 1273 and the licensed seasonal flu shot, right? And if you're older, you're going to get the high dose flu shot. And then we've got a placebo. So you're going to get 0.9%. It's salt water, right? Saline. They're all excited about that. So we get 8,000 participants enrolled and vaccinated, about 4,000 in each age group. Non-inferior immunogenicity of the mRNA 1083 was demonstrated against all vaccine-matched influenza and SARS-CoV-2 strains. The adverse events, numerically higher in frequency after the mRNA 1083 than in the comparators. No safety concerns. But let's look a little more closely at all the results. So they've got a nice figure 2 where you can look at, favoring the 1083, which is the combined versus the other approach where we're mixing the 2 vaccines. Really across the board, we're getting really good antibody levels in people 65 and over. We're getting really good antibodies in people 50 to 64, and always favoring this new 1083 combo mRNA flu COVID shot.
Now, does this have to go through an efficacy trial next season to show that this actually protects clinically?
So that's a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So according to what we've heard lately from the FDA, this kind of stuff is not going to cut it. Yeah.
And I think from what we've heard about mRNA vaccines, the opinion of the administration, I'd be surprised if any mRNA vaccine got licensed.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, this is very disturbing because we know from decades that those antibody levels correlate with efficacy.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because one shot for flu and COVID is very convenient.
It would be great. Yeah, it's very convenient, one and done, right?
But this new flu vaccine initiative by NIAID, right, is using old boiled and formalin virus. It's just not.
I think they're using the new inactivation, like the propionyl. Like there's a new way to but still it's the same. Let's use inactivated virus. Let's use the technology that the Chinese used that didn't work. Let's go back to technology from the 50s, right?
It's just to avoid mRNA because they think it does something which it doesn't do.
I'm not sure they think it does. It's political again, right? There's there's a base out there. You can get voters and money by just saying bad things about mRNA.
Well, like you said last time, what is it? Montana? No.
It was Minnesota. Yeah.
State legislature wanted to outlaw and make it a weapon of mass destruction, mRNA vaccines.
Label it a weapon of mass destruction, So viral early phase, right? We still have the recommendations. Paxlovid, Remdesivir, Molnupiravir, convalescent plasma for folks at high risk of progression. A lot of people are concerned that maybe those prices should be brought down commensurate with the number needed to treat and relative risk. And I'm always a fan of less expensive medicines. So COVID early inflammatory phase, talking about steroids, right person, right time. anticoagulation, pulmonary support. But what about remdesivir, Veklury? So I've mentioned before that there seems to be a war on remdesivir that's motivated in part by the high cost of the medicine. And I'll sort of say up front, we'll return to this. I understand this, right? A lot of hospitals are concerned. $2,000 for a course of remdesivir. We're worried about Medicaid cuts. A lot of hospitals have closed across the country. They're starting to look at, cost-benefit questions. So there's a side to that we'll return to. But this week we have the article, Remdesivir associated with reduced mortality in hospitalized COVID-19 patients, treatment effectiveness using real-world data and natural language processing, published in BMC Infectious Disease. So here, these investigators aim to use real-world evidence generated by artificial intelligence techniques to assess the impact of remdesivir on COVID-19 associated outcomes, including in-hospital mortality. So they're going to use this EHR read, which is an NLP technology, including SNOMED CT terminology. A lot of this, I got to say, I'm not like, the AI expert here, but they're going to extract unstructured clinical information from electronic health records. Retrospectively, they're looking at hospitalized COVID-19 patients with moderate to severe pneumonia in 3 Spanish hospitals, January 2021, March 2022. And so you're going to have basically people who are remdesivir eligible. And then they're going to break them down into folks that got remdesivir versus people that didn't get remdesivir. And then what I really like, they do this propensity score matching. So they really match them. And they say, okay, we've got this, they're eligible, now they're matched, and for whatever reason they got or didn't get remdesivir, they're going to do Charleston Morbidity Index, their vaccination status, treatment, which hospital, what period as far as variants, age, sex, etc. So really robust. We've got 7,651,773 electronic health records, 84,408 patients. 6,756 were detected with moderate to severe COVID-19 pneumonia during the study period. The median age was 72 years of age. About half, a little over half were male. And then you're going to get the breakdown of folks that got remdesivir versus folks that didn't get remdesivir. The hazard ratio for in-hospital mortality at 28 days was 0.73. So they go and they do all this statistical analysis, and they end up telling us, concluding that remdesivir treatment was associated with a statistically significant 37% reduction in inpatient mortality compared with propensity score match controls who did not receive remdesivir. I got 27, but I think there's a different way they're doing the...
It's a good number either way.
Yeah, it's a good number.
It's a shame that the price prevents people from getting it.
Well, I think that's what's driving it. So I wanted to discuss first, is this consistent with what we're seeing over time, right? Mm-hmm. And then we'll circle back to the money issue. So we had the ACTT1, and that was a hazard ratio of 0.73. So that was very similar, right? The WHO Solidarity trial, a 13% reduction in patient mortality. We had a recent meta-analysis of randomized control trials, more than 10,000 patients from 40 countries. There, they saw about a 12% reduction. Another study, we'll leave links to all these, but another study of patients with COVID-19 in 51 U.S. hospitals. There, we had inpatient mortality reduction by 40%, looking at overall, 37% in those needing low-flow oxygen. Another study, Premier Healthcare Database in the U.S., 24 and 12% reduction in in-hospital mortality at 14 and 28 days. Similar 33% reduction in inpatient mortality in a comparative matched analysis of data from a phase 3 randomized control trial. And then another large U.S. study with propensity score matched where we saw in-hospital mortality by 17% drop, 23% in people high flow or non-invasive ventilation.
So these are all people treated inpatient, right, in the hospital?
Yeah. So this is week 2, right? So we really think like 7, 8, 9, 10, so sort of the tail end. So within 10 days, but hospitalized patients getting remdesivir.
If you give it earlier in that first week, you get a better result.
Even better. Yeah, if you can get it earlier. And if you get it earlier, you only have to do 3 days, right? That's the pine tree data. If you were past day 7, then we do a 5-day course. But it's a problem. I mean, it's $2,000 for the course. So the hospitals are, I don't think restriction is the right word. I think stewardship is the right word. Really trying to put policies in place to make sure that this isn't being given to a person that isn't going to benefit from it. So let's say it's day 11, or let's say it's a 27-year-old, worried well, and, maybe a little bit of sniffles at day, 10. That's not a person that we think is going to make. But I think we have to be honest. It works. In the right patients, there's a number of robust studies that it makes a difference. I mean, the number needed to treat has changed over time. And maybe that's the time for the pharmaceutical industry, for Gilead, to revisit. Are we going to bankrupt rural hospitals, to enrich Gilead, put us in this awkward position, where we really can't afford to provide, evidence-based therapy. So
if the hospital gives a patient remdesivir and bills the insurance, they don't get reimbursed, they take the loss, right?
Yeah, they kind of gets bundled in with the care. Yeah. All right, COVID, late phase past long COVID. So the article, excess weight is associated with neurological and neuropsychiatric symptoms in post-COVID-19 condition, a systematic review and meta-analysis published in PLOS One. So they do this comprehensive search, check all these databases, including medRxiv. Basically, these studies included 79,000 individuals with excess weight versus 58,000 normal weight, 30,000 individuals with obesity versus 107,000 non-obese individuals. Now, the presence of excess weight in post-COVID conditions was significantly associated with persistent depression, relative risk 1.21, headache, relative risk or odds ratio 1.23, memory issues, relative risk 1.43, sleep disturbance, relative risk 1.3, and vertigo, relative risk 1.2. And then our last article, the article Identification of Soluble Biomarkers that Associate with Distinct Manifestations of Long COVID, was published in Nature Immunology. And here, again, we're seeing objective abnormalities in people with long COVID.
So, Daniel, the obesity in long COVID, what would be the mechanism, you think?
We're not sure, right? So there is some potential back and forth here. One is, are they depressed? I've often seen this in patients too. Not only are they debilitated and have fatigue, but now they're starting to get heavier and heavier, which is very upsetting, particularly see a disproportionate number of younger women affected, right? So does that drive depression? Depression drives the eating. The fatigue, you're not moving, so you're not burning the calories. I think there's a number of things going on.
Okay.
But no, it's an excellent question. But yeah, here, as I was starting to say in this study, independent cohorts, Sweden and the UK, they're actually identifying this shared plasma biomarker signature of disease, linking breathlessness with apoptotic inflammatory networks centered on various proteins, dysregulated pathways associated with cell cycle progression, lung injury, platelet activation. So really, I always think it's nice. There still is a lot of dismissiveness out there. And so it's nice when you can, say, there's a consistent clinical history. There are testable, identifiable biochemical abnormalities in a large number of these folks. There's physiological abnormalities, right? You could do that orthostatic hypotension testing, the POTS testing, and some of the other heart rate variability, heart rate recovery. So really a lot of objective stuff here. And all right, after 5 years, still saying no one is safe until everyone is safe. I want everyone to pause the recording right here. Go to parasiteswithoutborders.com. Click on that donate button. Even a small amount helps. May, June, and July, we're doing our FIMRIC, Foundation International Medical Relief of Children fundraiser. I was WhatsApping back and forth with some of the folks over there in Uganda. And we're trying to get up to our maximum donation of $20,000. We can only help them. We can only do what we do with your support.
It's time for your questions for Daniel. You can send yours to daniel@microbe.tv. Anonymous writes, I didn't expect Daniel to know this because He's an infectious disease doctor, not a dentist. But there is another option for children in areas without fluoridated water, fluoride tablets, recommended by USPSTF too. And Anonymous provides a link for that.
Oh, that's great.
So in those states that have banned it,
you can now take your they're going to ban that too, though, you say.
Karen writes, I've been listening to TWiV since early 2020. Thanks for continuing to provide top quality information every week. I was very pleased to hear you adding a specific focus on science misinformation and opposition to cuts in federal funding for science to your weekly clinical update. Your reminder to call your members of Congress about this is a great way to get people to take the next step. So members of Congress is MOC.
Okay, MOC.
Calling MOCs is sometimes daunting for people who have never done it before. You never get your senator or representative. You're going to get a person in the office, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, you got a staffer. You get a
staffer. There is a new app called 5 Calls at 5calls.org, which automatically identifies your MOCs, 2 senators, representative, your governor, and your secretary of state, brings up a script for the topic you want to call about, and then chooses which one of the 5 identified individuals should be contacted. When you click on the phone number, it dials for you. Then it asks you to report the results of your calls. So she gives a screenshot of some of the issues that you can talk about. Condemn RFK's attacks on vaccines research and the autism community. Defend science progress and protect the NIH. Protect public health. Oppose HHS workforce and program cuts. Save the VA. Save NIH and NSF. Stop HR 722, a national abortion ban. Okay, it's HR 722. Ridiculous. And she provides a link to that. Karen E. is an MD, MPH. So that's good.
All right. Yeah, we'll have all those links in our show notes, right? So,
Nancy writes, do you think COVID vaccines will be available this fall with the Trump administration? I got a booster in March. Should I get another booster this summer in case we are not permitted to get them?
It's a good question, right? So the meeting, I understand, is coming in June. There's going to be a meeting where they're going to give recommendations on what's going to happen with COVID shots in the fall. We did not have great uptake this last year. It was down single-digit percentages. So they may see this as something they can just move away from. So yeah, we'll let you know when we know more.
I mean, there's only one choice now in the U.S., mRNA, right?
Well, it's a realistic fear, right? Because they've placed this undue hurdle on Novavax,
right,
which was people wanting to use like more traditional technology, and now they've basically created an impediment to that. There's also a lot of people that want to do it because they got a lot of reactogenicity. They're down for a day or however many hours with the mRNA, and now you're getting all this movement anti-mRNA vaccines. So yeah, I'm a little worried about the fall. I share your concerns.
Todd writes, in the last clinical update during your pertussis discussion, Vincent commented that the recent cases were mostly in unvaccinated individuals. Dr. Griffin agreed, saying that pertussis is a vaccine-preventable illness. I don't dispute this, but I wonder if we need a different schedule for vaccination. Even those who get vaccinated on schedule are at risk of pertussis infection and severe whooping cough. Last summer, my 18-year-old son tested positive for pertussis after his girlfriend, also 18, received a whooping cough diagnosis. She had the classic symptoms, went to the doctor after coughing and vomiting. As soon as her test came back positive, my son got tested. He had very mild coughing and was started on a Z-Pack. His cough lingered but didn't worsen. Hers lasted nearly 100 days. Both my son and girlfriend were up to date on their vaccines. Both received Tdap after they turned 11. My other children and my wife all had Tdap boosters recently. I imagine that this, along with the Z-Pack, protected us from being infected. This led me to look into the effectiveness of Tdap. The recommendation is to get a booster every 10 years, but it appears that AP pertussis vaccine effectiveness wanes much sooner than 10 years. Give some references for that. That's acellular pertussis, right?
Yep.
It would be interesting to see what percentage of the recent pertussis cases were vaccinated and when their recent booster was. With what appears to be solid evidence that the pertussis vaccine effectiveness wears off much sooner than 10 years, would it make sense to offer vaccination on a different schedule?
Yeah. So every this is a great email, and yeah, everything you say here is true. So the every 10 years is driven by the tetanus, not by the pertussis. Their pertussis does wane more quickly. I mean, if someone hasn't had their tetanus in 12 or 13 years, I'm not particularly devastated, but it's the pertussis that wanes. So what have we done to try to counter this? Well, we haven't increased the pertussis frequency for the vaccination despite that waning. We have targeted high-risk groups. So with every pregnancy, there's a revaccination, and there's also a ring vaccination that we try to do to protect the most vulnerable. Now, an 18-year-old gets it, and their last shot was when they were 11. You see what you see. Maybe you have a 100-day cough, maybe you get sick for a while, but you're not going to have, I mean, we see deaths, we see hospitalizations, we see all these bad outcomes in pertussis in the newborns and the very young. So there we're actually vaccinating mom, and we're while pregnant. And we're also vaccinating everyone around who's going to come in contact. So if anyone's having grandchildren, you may have run into this. You get the call, that you've got to get your Tdap.
Okay, and Deb writes, I've been relying on your updates for several years. Cannot express how thankful I am for the lifeline you provide to reality in these dark times. I hope I'm not being like the woman who pushed the room service button just before the Titanic hit the iceberg, whose faulty logic led her to conclude she had caused the catastrophe by pushing the button. Providers at the ER this week looked at me as if I too were engaging in some classic post hoc ergo prompter hoc est, thinking when I suggested a connection between vision loss and COVID booster. My 87-year-old mother received all COVID shots and boosters since they became available. She's done very well after all of them, no more than a sore arm. Recent one, 5-3, it's last 2 Saturdays ago. By Sunday night, she had a headache, and by Monday, she was very ill with nausea, body ache, extreme headache. This seemed within what could be expected after a shot until on Wednesday, she reported loss of vision at the top and bottom of her field. She has glaucoma with XEN gel stent placement, both eyes. She also has wet macular degeneration in the left eye. Her retina doctor found that her good right eye was now worse than the left, in which she receives shots of Lucentis every 5 weeks. I asked if an immune response to the shot could be causing a problem, and he did not think so, but said theoretically maybe this could happen. The pressure in her right eye was 40 and left 14. Typically, the pressures are 10 to 12 since the stent placement. We were sent to the ER to rule out a stroke. After 26 hours there, stroke was ruled out, but no explanation given as to what might be the cause. I asked all providers about a possible connection to the shot and inflammation, but they all said, I never heard of it. So my question is, could my mother's huge response to this shot, and it may not be a response to the shot, right? Could be something else.
Yeah.
Signal some other process that is inflaming the optic nerve or other areas that could be treated with steroids and possibly get her back to baseline vision. Could the issue be the stents being recognized as a foreign substance? No provider seems to want to investigate the possibility of a connection to the shot. Maybe I am just reaching in the face of a life-changing loss of vision. I'm hoping she could be one of the right patients to get steroids at the right time. If there was some reversible inflammation being caused by the booster, maybe some of her vision could be restored. So any thoughts you have would be most appreciated. And P.S., my brother who sails on Lake George is concerned you will miss this season because of the mast disaster. I don't know what that is. He would like to extend an invitation to you to sail up there or the Hudson in Haverstraw Bay, where he races on the fastest of the slow boats.
Oh, okay.
What's the mast disaster?
So my sailboat in the winter, it's comes out of the water. It's stored on the hard, as we call it, and the mast is taken off and put in the storage building. And a whole bunch of masts are in the storage building. The storage building caught on fire.
I see.
And destroyed everything, including my mast. And so since the boat's from Denmark and, it's designed to have a mast that matches that boat, you can't just say, oh, just make me a mast here in the U.S.
Can't you and I get a telephone pole and just stick it in?
We could do that. So they're building, so they're refabricating an aluminum mast in Denmark, and then they've got to get it across the ocean. And I had to pay a tariff before they would even build it to because they're like, we're not going to build something if you haven't paid the tariff ahead of time so we can send it to you. And that's what it is. Like I'm writing
20% or something?
Yeah, it's like 20%. I'm writing like a check for 20% extra on top of the cost of the mast. But yes, that's what that was. Let's go back to the vaccine and the eyeball. It did remind me of, I did have this one individual who, with acute COVID, he developed an inflammatory issue and actually needed to be on steroids for like 5 days. And then the vaccines come out, and instead of calling me, he goes ahead and gets a vaccine, and it triggers the same, inflammatory response. Have to put him on steroids again. So there are rare. We always admit this. There are vaccine adverse events. They tend to be much rarer than what we see with the disease, right? Like how many people have vision loss with vaccine versus how many people had vision loss with COVID, myocarditis, death, etc. So from what you're describing, if an ophthalmologist is looking in there, they should see some evidence of inflammation of the optic nerve, or this sounds like there may be some issue with increased pressure with the glaucoma, the 14 versus 40. So like a tripling of what you would expect as a level. So I don't know. The other is, how do you explore it? It's very hard to explore it. It's very hard to, it's the chicken and the egg, and hard to know what triggered this problem. When sort of this N of one that we've got here.
Yeah, sure.
So it really comes almost to a question, does someone think it's worth a trial of steroids? Do you do a few days of steroids and see if it helps? And so that ultimately would be the question.
It wouldn't be harmful, right?
You sort of have to look at big picture, diabetes, other things.
Okay.
Yeah, make sure it's not acute COVID and you're giving them steroids during that first week. So yeah, you
Get
just
a
have
COVID test, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's TWiV Weekly Clinical Update with Dr. Daniel Griffin. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and I'm supposed to say, and everyone be safe. I forget when I'm hanging out.
Yeah, everyone be safe.
Yeah, everyone be safe.